This is not, in fact, a treasure vault.
Then what is it?
Good question.
Now, let's be honest for a second, you could easily swap out a helmet for a hat and a hook for a whip, and you've basically got Indiana Jones and the Temple of History.
Excuse me, what?
This week's escapade took us to new places with familiar faces, and once the journey was done, we were left with a fuck ton of questions that will likely play out in two ways. Firstly, become a pointless MacGuffin for another Ray adventure. Or, as history has proven with Filoni and co., they'll draw back on this at a later date with some significance, like the Mortis Gods and Clone Wars coming back in Rebels as the guides to the world between worlds. Interestingly, this was our first look at anything to do with the Old Republic, or anything intentionally at least. We're talking about those games that look better in the cinematic trailers, or the legacy of books that now have very little meaning in the current state of Star Wars canon. Filoni has tried for years to work the Old Republic into this, and we almost got glimmers of it in the Mortis arc in the Clone Wars series. However, there's rarely ever been a right moment, as the current narrative has required immediate and constant attention. So I can see this becoming a vocal point for something down the road. Before I go much further, let's give you a rundown of events. We open on Wrecker and Omega clearly laying out the theme for this episode in exploring and finding treasures, and as they wander through the dilapidated cockpit of the Razor Crest, or at least that's what it resembles to me, they make their way back to Sid's. We cut back to the bar, and Fee is indulging herself by recounting tales to Bolo and Ketch, with Tech pointing out all the inconsistencies between every time she's told that tale. Wrecker and Omega then stroll on in with their loot and drop it at the feet of Tech and Fee. Tech sees value in one part, but Fee dismisses him and says that there's a possibility for anything to be worth something in this, and spots one of the trinkets that Omega found and determines it to be a MacGuffin that could help him find more treasure.
Oh, how convenient!
After a brief bit of debate, they toddle off. Once they arrive on world, they locate an entrance to a tomb following the guide of the compass, and after discovering they can use it to find their way through, they proceed but quickly are interrupted by a creature, and in amidst the chaos after its attack on Wrecker, become separated by a spell of debris. Tech, Wrecker and Echo find another way around, while Hunter, Omega and Fee continue forward, encountering another trap before making it to a door that has the heart of the mountain inside. Once they get it open, Fee slides down and removes it, but it activates a giant mech that they're inside the head of. As the mech begins to move around, it starts to shoot at any objects foreign to the planet, taking out Mel, and almost decimating the Marauder. As Fee and Hunter go after the heart as it's steadily descending into the lower depths of the mech, Wrecker and the rest take on the returning creature and dispose of it pretty quickly. As Tech and Omega manage to reconnect the stone, it melts and the mech shuts down.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
Shortly after, and once day is broken, we close out on the episode with the crew making it back to the Marauder, and Fee saying that this could lead them to another world with some of the information that they've picked up here.
Sheer fucking hubris.
As I've mentioned before, Filoni and co. have taken the approach that nothing's ever truly an accident in Star Wars, particularly from the animation department. Take a look at the Purrgil and again the Mortis Gods in Rebels, and certainly the mention of Thrawn in The Mandalorian. We know that the majority of stuff will receive an answer eventually. Right now, I can't see where this would necessarily fit in. As I mentioned in the opening as well, you could simply swap the helmets for hats, the cables for a whip, and the heart of the mountain for something like the Crystal Skull, and you've got an episode of Indiana Jones. Plus, laced with some little hints in my mind from Uncharted, definitely Fallen Order and God of War in some of the designs, the mechanics, and solutions in how they dealt with the situations. I don't feel that this necessarily detracts from anything regarding the show or episode as a whole, it just feels a little more personal in this. Filoni and co. have often been known to throw in references to their favourite fantasy and adventure stories before in Star Wars animation, so this isn't exactly detracting from the norm, and you could just say this is them blowing off some steam and having a bit of fun behind the scenes. I do believe we got an answer to what scorched the earth of Scaranal, which is something at least, but the biggest question that remains in my mind is why? What would have use for such a thing? Tech mentioned that this predates the Republic, and Fee even mentioned that the compass alone predates the Jedi itself. So that would imply that this is entering the time of the Old Republic. There's a larger mystery afoot here, and the trail seems to want to bring us back to that time that Disney has chosen to ignore for the sake of Mary Sue and other adventures. However, Dave is going to do what Dave always does. He's gone fuck it, and we're now venturing into unexplored territories of the Star Wars history for the canon material. This is an exciting time, and if this is the first step down that path, then my interest has peaked. But as of right now, the oldest piece of canon material we have is the recent workings of the High Republic and Star Wars Acolyte. This is certainly interesting, and even the line from Fee mentioning that she likes to dig up legends is certainly a nod to the fans of that time, and that will likely get something from it down the line soon. I think the idea of exploring abandoned settlements, relics, and planets of the past in uncharted sectors would be a great way to position the Batchers going forward. However, let them tie up their loose ends first, as that is the draw for a lot of people in this series. The creature itself was an intriguing one for me. This didn't necessarily strike me as a native to this world, though there's every possibility that it could be, but it was extremely defensive around the mech, though again it could just naturally be aggressive and sought out a good meal. The design of this creature was certainly up for speculation in the original trailers by many on this platform, as a possible link to the Zillo Beast from Clone Wars, which would have been a brilliant addition to that lore, but I just can't see it. Even if it was in its infancy at this point, it doesn't resemble any aspects of the creature. But it was effective in delivering a good scare in the initial moments when it tried to take out Wrecker, but it kind of lost its effect for me a little after. I think there's a running theme with this particular episode where I'm drawing a lot of comparisons to other things in Star Wars, but it reminded me of Gore from Grievous's lair. Probably not, but you never know. I love the idea that Fee is just a natural thrill seeker and knows her stuff in these matters as well, and by the end is proud that Omega understood the point of being a pirate, or liberator of ancient wonders, is that the treasure could often just be an answer. It was nice to get a better understanding of who Fee is through this, though it didn't come about in the way that I assumed it would have, with some high stakes mission or anything like that, but it was a nice addition regardless. What I'm hoping for though is that this isn't supposed to be a replacement or stand-in for Hondo.
I smell profit!
She possesses the charm but little of the charisma at this point in time, and I definitely need to see more from her. The idea of Omega discovering this MacGuffin seems feasible enough, it's a big galaxy, but another question I have is, how did it make its way out there? Who was carrying it? Why were they there? And how'd they survive? I'm making an assumption too that this is the scrapyard of Old Mantell, so pretty common traffic passes through this planet, so it could be from the hands of anybody. And I've got to reiterate once more, does this not look like the cockpit of the Razor Crest? Anyway, that aside, it was interesting to see the Batchers just go along on this one, even with Hunter's distrust of Fee and Echo's rejection of this immediately, as ultimately, it was for Omega. Like Echo mentioned in the opening episode of the season, and I'm gonna say it again, that's gonna bite Hunter in the ass at some point. It swerved their chances of an easy life, saving her the first time from the Empire, and now this encounter brought him to the Veil of Death 4 times in one episode. Just keep an eye on this, because I have a concern that this might lead to something later. I did spot one thing, was that Hunter looked to Echo for a second opinion throughout a lot of this episode based on their last escapade that involved treasure, but I feel like Hunter certainly values his opinion far more than anyone else's in the group, and they have been more of a natural pairing since the end of Season 1. Overall, I wouldn't say that this was a nothing episode, it just didn't scream out as relevant to the larger narrative right now, which I can see a lot of people will take issue with undoubtedly. Though, I've said it before and I'll say it once more, Filoni rarely makes mistakes, and has drawn back on seemingly disconnected adventures at a later date. Visually, this episode was a struggle at times, where you were more reliant on the torchlight, so definitely watch this with the curtains closed if you stand any chance of wishing to see anything. But that would be deliberate, as the writers would want you to explore this with the crew, not look too far ahead. Otherwise, when you could see what was going on, it was decent enough to look at, and the atmosphere of it felt run down and isolating, which added to the eerie tone of this one. The last thing worth mentioning is the pacing. It was steady, though I get it if people found it a little slow, but the idea of the episode was interesting enough, and it did well to add some new aspects to the lore in the likes of the Kaldar trinary system and Scar Anal. That's all I got to say on this episode. There wasn't really anything massive in terms of Easter eggs or little nods that I could point out specifically, but as always, if you have any thoughts regarding the episode, you know where to drop them. Leave a thumbs up as it helps things out a lot, and subscribe for more content down the road. Until next time though, take care everyone, and may the Force be with you all.